Hello, my darling, and welcome to today's story time. If you like what you hear, please make sure to subscribe. Chapter 2: The Miracle of the Sword and Stone. Now Arthur the Prince had all this time been nourished in Sir Ector's house as his own son, and was fair and tall and comely, being the age of 15 years, and great in strength, gentle in manner, and accomplished in all exercises proper for the training of a knight. But as yet he knew not of his father, for Merlin had so dealt that none save Uther and himself knew aught about him. Wherefore it befell that many of the knights and barons who heard King Uther speak before his death and call his son Arthur his successor were in great amazement, and some doubted, and others were displeased. Anon, the chief lords and princes set forth each to his own land, and, raising armed men and multitudes of followers, determined every one to gain the crown for himself. For they said in their hearts, if there be any such a son at all as he of whom this wizard forced the king to speak, who are we that a beardless boy should hold rule over us? So the land stood in great peril, for every lord and baron sought but his own advantage, and the Saxons, growing ever more adventurous, wasted and overran the towns and villages everywhere. Then Merlin went to Bryce, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and advised him to require all the earls and barons of the realm, and all knights and gentlemen at arms, to come to him at London before Christmas, under pain of a curse, that they might learn the will of heaven who should be king. This therefore the Archbishop did, and upon Christmas Eve were met together all the men in London, the greatest princes, lords and barons, and long before day they prayed in St. Paul's Church, and the Archbishop besought heaven for a sign who should be the lawful king of all the realm. And as they prayed, there was seen in the churchyard, set straight before the doorways of the church, a huge square stone, holding a naked sword stuck in the midst of it. And on the sword was written in letters of gold, whoso pulleth out the sword from this stone is born the rightful king of Britain. At this all the people wondered greatly, and when mass was over, the nobles, knights, and princes ran out eagerly from the church to see the sword and the stone. And a law was forthwith made that whoso should pull out the sword should be acknowledged straightway as the king of Britain. Then many knights and barons pulled at the sword with all of their might, and some of them tried many times, but none could stir or move it. When all had tried in vain, the Archbishop declared the man that heaven had chosen was not yet there. But God, he said, will doubtless make him known ere many days. So 10 knights were chosen, being men of high renown, to watch and keep the sword. And there was proclamation made through all the land that whomsoever would had liberty and leave to try and pull it from the stone. But though great many multitudes of people came, both gentle and simple, for many days, no man could ever move the sword a hair's breadth from its place. At New Year's Eve, a great tournament was to be held in London, which the Archbishop had devised to keep together lords and commons, lest they should grow estranged in the troubles and unsettled times, to which the tournament there came with many other knights, Sir Ector, Arthur's foster father, who had great possessions near to London, and with him came his son, Sir Kay, who had recently been made a knight and would take part in the jousting, and also young Arthur, to witness all of the sports and fighting. But as they rode towards the jousts, Sir Kay found suddenly he had no sword, for he had left it in his father's house, and turning to young Arthur, he prayed him to ride back and fetch it for him. "I will with a good will," said Arthur, and rode back fast after the sword. But when he came to the house, he found it locked and empty, for all were gone forth to see the tournament. Being angry and impatient, he said to himself, "I will ride to the churchyard, and take with me that sword sticketh in the stone, for my brother shall not go without a sword this day." So he rode and came to the churchyard, and, alighting from his horse, he tied him to the gate and went to the pavilion, which was pitched near the stone, wherein abode the 10 knights who watched and kept it. But he found no knights there, for all were gone to see the jousting. So he took the sword by its handle, and lightly and fiercely he pulled it out of the stone. And he took his horse and rode until he came to Sir Kay and delivered him the sword. But as soon as Sir Kay saw it, he knew well it was the sword of the stone. And, riding swiftly to his father, he cried out, "Lo, here, sir, is the sword of the stone, wherefore it is I who must be king of this land." When Sir Ector saw the sword, he turned back straight with Arthur and Sir Kay and came to the churchyard, and there alighting, they went all 3 into the church, and Sir Kay was sworn to tell truly how he came by the sword. Then he confessed it was his brother Arthur who had brought it to him, whereat Sir Ector, turning to young Arthur, asked him, "How gottest thou this sword?" "Sir," said Arthur, "I will tell you. When I went home to fetch my brother's sword, I found no one there to deliver it to me, for all were abroad to the jousts. Yet I was loath to leave my brother swordless, and, bethinking me of this one, I came hither eagerly to fetch it for him, and pulled it out of the stone with any pain." Then said Sir Ector, much amazed, and looking steadfastly upon Arthur, "If this indeed be thus, 'tis thou who shalt be the king of all of this land, and God will have it so, for none but he should be rightful lord of Britain might ever draw this sword forth from that stone. But let me now with mine own eyes see thee put the sword back into its place, and draw it forth again." "Well, that is no mystery," said Arthur, and straightway set the sword in the stone, and then Sir Ector tried to pull it out himself, and after him Sir Kay with all of his might, but both of them in vain. Then Arthur, reaching forth his hand and grasping at the pommel, pulled it out easily and at once. Then fell Sir Ector down upon his knees upon the ground before young Arthur, and also Sir Kay with him, and straightway did him homage as their sovereign lord. But Arthur cried aloud, "Alas, mine own dear father and my brother, why kneel ye thus before me?" "Nay, my lord Arthur," answered Sir Ector, "we are of no bloodship with thee, and little though I thought how high thy kin might be, yet wast thou never more than a foster child of mine." And then he told Arthur all he knew about his infancy, and how a stranger had delivered him with a great sum of gold into his hands to be brought up and nourished as his own born child, and then had disappeared. But when young Arthur heard of this, he fell upon Sir Ector's neck and wept, and made a great lamentation. "For now," he said, "I have in one day lost my father, and my mother, and my brother." "Sir," said Sir Ector presently, "when thou shalt be made king, be good and gracious unto me and mine. If not, said Arthur, I were no true man's son at all, for thou art he in all the world to whom I owe it the most, and my good lady and mother, thy wife, hath ever kept and fostered me as though I were her own. So if it be God's will that I be king hereafter, as thou sayest, desire of me whatever thing thou wilt, and I will do it, and God forbid that I should fail thee in this. I will but pray, replied Sir Ector, that thou wilt make my son, Sir Kay, thy foster brother, seneschal of all the lands. That shall he be, said Arthur, and never shall another hold that office, save thy son, while he and I do live. Anon they left the church and went to the archbishop to tell him that the sword had been achieved. And when he saw the sword in Arthur's hand, he set a day and summoned all of the princes, knights, and barons to meet again at St. Paul's church and see the will of heaven signified. So when they came together, the sword was put back into the stone, and all tried, from the greatest to the least, to move it. But there before them, all not one could take it, save Arthur alone. But then befell a great confusion and dispute, for some cried out, this was the will of heaven, and long live King Arthur. But many more were full of wrath and said, what? Would ye give the ancient scepter of this land unto a boy born none know how? And the contention growing greatly, until nothing could be done to pacify their rage, the meeting was at length broken up by the archbishop and adjourned until Candlemas, when all should meet again. But when Candlemas was come, Arthur alone again pulled forth the sword, though more than ever came to win it, and the barons, sorely vexed and angry, put it in delay until Easter. But as he had sped before, so he did at Easter, and the barons yet once more contrived delays until Pentecost. But now the archbishop, seeing fully God's will, called together, by Merlin's counsel, a band of knights and gentlemen at arms, and he set them about Arthur to keep him safe until the feast of Pentecost. And when at the feast Arthur still again alone prevailed to move the sword, the people all with one accord cried out, long live King Arthur! We will have no more delay, nor any other king, for so it is God's will, and we will slay whosoever resisteth him and Arthur. And wherewithal they kneeled down all at once, and cried for Arthur's grace and pardon, that they had so long delayed him from his crown. Then he full sweetly and majestically pardoned them, and taking in his hand the sword, he offered it upon the high altar of the church. Anon he was solemnly knighted with great pomp by the most famous knight there present, and the crown was placed upon his head, and having taken oath to all the people, lords and commons, to be the true king and deal in justice only until his life's end, he received homage and service from all the barons who held lands and castles from the crown. Then he made Sir Kay High Steward of England, and Sir Badywayne of Britain Constable, and Sir Ulfius Chamberlain. And after this, with all his court and a great retinue of knights and armed men, he journeyed into Wales, and was crowned again in the old city of Caerleon upon Usk. Meanwhile, those knights and barons who had so long delayed him from the crown met together and went up to the coronation feast at Caerleon, and there they ate and drank such things as were set before them at the royal banquet, sitting with the others in the great hall. But when, after the banquet, Arthur began, according to the ancient royal custom, to bestow great boons and fiefs on whom he would, they all with one accord rose up, and scornfully refused his gifts. They cried out that they would take nothing from a beardless boy, come of low or unknown birth, but would instead give him good gifts of hard sword strokes between neck and shoulders. Whereat arose a deadly tumult in the hall, and every man there made him ready to fight. But Arthur leapt up as a flame of fire against them, and all his knights and barons, drawing their swords, rushed after him upon them, and began a full sore battle. Presently the king's party prevailed, and drove the rebels from the hall and from the city, closing the gates behind them. And King Arthur broke his sword upon them in his eagerness and rage. But amongst them were 6 kings of great renown and might, who more than all raged against Arthur and determined to destroy him, namely, King Lot, King Nanters, King Urien, King Carados, King Idar, and King Anguisant. These 6, therefore, joining their armies together, laid close siege to the city of Caerleon, wherefrom King Arthur had so shamefully driven them. And after 15 days, Merlin came suddenly into their camp and asked what all of their treason was for. Then he declared to them that Arthur was no base adventurer, but King Uther's son, whom they were bound to serve and honor, even though heaven had not vouchsafed that wondrous miracle of the sword. Some of the kings, when they heard Merlin speak thusly, marveled and believed him, but others, like King Lot, laughed him and his words to scorn, and mocked him for a conjurer and wizard. But it was agreed with Merlin that Arthur should come forth and speak with the kings. So he went forth to them to the city gate, and with him the archbishop and Merlin, and Sir King, Sir Brastias, and a great company of others. And he spared them not in his speech, but spoke to them as king and chieftain, telling them plainly he would make them all bow to him if he lived, unless they chose to do him homage then and there. And so they parted in great wrath, and each side armed in haste. What will ye do? Said Merlin to the kings. Ye had best hold your hands, for were ye 10 times as many, ye should not prevail. Shall we be afraid of a dream reader? Quoth King Lot in scorn. With that, Merlin vanished away and went to King Arthur. Then Arthur said to Merlin, I have need now of a sword that shall chastise these rebels terribly. Come then with me, said Merlin, for hard by there is a sword I can gain for thee. So they rode out that night until they came to a fair and broad lake, and in the midst of it King Arthur saw an arm thrust up, clothed in white samite, and holding a great sword in her hand. Ah, said Merlin, yonder is the sword I speak of. Then they saw a damsel floating on the lake in the moonlight. What damsel is that? Asked Arthur. That is the lady of the lake, said Merlin. For upon this lake there is a rock, and on the rock a noble palace, where she abideth, and she will come towards thee presently, and thou shalt ask her courteously for the sword. Therewith the damsel came to King Arthur and saluted him, and he saluted her and said, Lady, what sword is that the arm holdeth under the water? I would that it were mine, for I have no sword. Sir King, said the lady of the lake, this sword is mine, and if thou wilt give me in return a gift whenever I shall ask it of thee, thou shalt have it. By my faith, said he, I give thee any gift that thou shalt ever ask. Well, said the damsel, go into yonder barge, and row thyself unto the sword, and take it and the scabbard with thee, and I will ask my gift of thee, and I see in my time. So King Arthur and Merlin alighted and tied their horses to 2 trees and went into the barge. And when they came to the sword that the hand held, King Arthur took it by the handle and bore it with him, and the arm and hand went down under the water. And then they went back to land and rode again to Caerleon. On the morrow, Merlin bade King Arthur to set fiercely upon his enemy, and in the meanwhile 300 good knights went over to King Arthur from the rebels' side. Then at the spring of day, when they had scarce left their tents, he fell on them with might and main, and Sir Baudywayne, Sir Kay, and Sir Brastias slew on the right hand and on the left marvelously. And ever in the thickest of the fight, King Arthur raged like a young lion, and he laid on with his sword and did wondrous deeds of arms to the joy and admiration of the knights and barons who beheld him. Then King Lot, King Carados, and the King of the 100 Knights, who also rode with them, going round to the rear, set on King Arthur fiercely from behind. But Arthur, turning to his knights, fought ever in the foremost press until his horse was slain beneath him. At that, King Lot rode furiously at him and smote him down, but rising straightway and being set again on horseback, he drew his sword Excalibur that he had gained by Merlin from the Lady on the Lake, which, shining brightly as the light of 30 torches, dazzled the eyes of his enemies, and therewith, falling on them afresh with all of his knights, he drove them back and slew them in great numbers, and Merlin by his arts scattered among them fire and pitchy smoke, so that they broke and fled. Then all the common people of Caerleon, seeing them give way, rose up with one accord, and rushed at them with clubs and staves, and chased them far and wide. Then they slew many great knights and lords, and the remainder of them fled, and were seen no more. Thus won King Arthur his first battle, and put his enemies to shame. But the 6 kings, though sorely routed, prepared for a new war, and joining to themselves, 5 others swore together that, whether for weal or woe, they would keep steadfast alliance until they had destroyed King Arthur. Then, with a host of 50,000 men at arms on horseback and 10,000 on foot, they were soon ready. They sent forth their 4 riders and drew from the northern country towards Arthur to the castle of Bedgrain. But he by Merlin's counsel had sent over sea to King Ban of Benwick and King Bors of Gaul, praying them to come and help him in his wars, and he promised to help in return against King Claudas, their foe. Those kings made answer that they would joyfully fulfill his wish, and shortly after came to London with 300 knights, well arrayed for both peace and war. They left behind them a great army on the other side of the sea, until they had consulted with King Arthur and his ministers how they might best dispose of it. And Merlin, being asked for his advice and help, agreed to go himself and fetch it over sea to England, which in one night he did. And he brought with him 10,000 horsemen, and led them northward privately to the forest of Bedgrain, and there lodged them in a valley secretly. Then by the counsel of Merlin, when they knew which way the 11 knights would ride and sleep, King Arthur with Kings Ban and Bors made themselves ready with their army for the fight, having yet but 30,000 men, counting the 10,000 who had come from Gaul. Now shall ye heed my advice, said Merlin. I would that King Ban and King Bors, with all their fellowship of 10,000 men, were led to ambush in this wood ere daylight, and stir not therefrom until the battle hath been long waged. And thou, Lord Arthur, at the spring of day, Draw forth thine army before the enemy, and dress the battle, so that they may at once see all thy host. For they will be the more rash and hardy when they see you have but 20,000 men. To this the 3 knights and the barons heartily consented, and it was done as Merlin had devised. So on the morrow, when the hosts beheld each other, the host of the north was greatly cheered to find so few led out against them. Then gave King Arthur the command to Sir Ulfius and Sir Brastias to take 3,000 men at arms and to open battle. They therefore, setting fiercely on the enemy, slew them on the right hand and the left, until it was wonderful to see their slaughter. When the 11 kings beheld so small a band doing such mighty deeds of arms, they were ashamed, and charged them fiercely in return. Then was Sir Ulfius's horse slain under him, but he fought well and marvellously on foot against Duke Eustace and King Clarence, who set upon him grievously, until Sir Brastias, seeing his great peril, pricked towards them swiftly, and so smote the duke through with his spear that horse and men fell down and rolled over. Whereat King Clarence turned upon Sir Brastias, and rushing furiously together, they each unhorsed the other, and fell both to the ground, where they lay a long time stunned. Then came Sir Kay the seneschal with his 6 companions, and did wondrously well, until the 11 kings went out against them, and overthrew Sir Griflet and Sir Lucas the butler. And when Sir Kay saw Sir Griflet unhorsed and on foot, he rode against King Nanters hotly, and smote him down, and led his horse to Griflet, and horsed him again. With the same spear did Sir Kay smite down King Lot, and wounded him fully. But seeing this, the king of the 100 knights rushed at Sir Kay and overthrew him in return. He took his horse and gave it to King Lot. And when Sir Griflet saw Sir Kay's mischance, he set his spear in rest, and riding at a mighty man-at-arms, he cast him down headlong, and caught his horse, and led it straight away to Sir Kay. By now the battle was growing perilous and hard, and both sides fought with rage and fury. And Sir Ulfius and Sir Brastias were both afoot, and in great danger of their death. They were foully stained and trampled under horses' feet. Then King Arthur, putting spurs to his horse, rushed forward like a lion into the midst of all the melee, and singling out King Cradlemont of North Wales, smote him through the left side and overthrew him. And taking his horse by the rein, he brought it to Sir Ulfius in haste and said, "Take this horse, my old friend, for thou hast great need of one, and charge by my side." And even as he spoke, he saw Sir Ector, Sir Kay's father, smite down to the earth by the king of the 100 knights, and his horse taken to King Cradlemont. But when King Arthur saw him ride upon Sir Ector's horse, his wrath was very great, and with his sword he smote King Cradlemont upon the helm, and shore off the 4th part thereof, and of the shield. And he drove the sword onward to the horse's neck, and he slew the horse as well, and he hurled the king upon the ground. And now the battle waxed so great and furious that all the noise and sound thereof rang out by water and by wood. King's ban and boors, with all their knights and men-at-arms in ambush, hearing the tumult and the cries, trembled and shook for eagerness, and scarce could stay in secret, but made themselves ready for the fray, and dressed their shields and harnesses. But when King Arthur saw the fury of the enemy, he raged like a mad lion, and stirred and drove his horse, now here, now there, to the right hand, to the left, and stayed not in his wrath until he had slain full 20 knights. He wounded also King Lot so sorely in the shoulder that he left the field, in great pain, and Dolor cried, "Do ye as I devise, or we shall be destroyed, fellow knights. I, with the king of the 100 knights, King Anguissant, King Ydir, and the Duke of Cambenet, will take 15,000 men and make a circuit. Meanwhile, that ye do hold the battle with 12,000. Then coming suddenly, we will fall fiercely on them from behind and put them to the rout. But else shall we never stand against them." So Lot and 4 kings departed with their party to one side, and the 6 other kings dressed their ranks against King Arthur and fought long and stoutly. But now King Ban and Bors, with all their army fresh and eager, broke from their ambush and met face to face the 5 kings and their host as they came round behind. And then began the frantic struggle with breaking of spears and clashing of swords and slaying of men and horses. And then King Lot, spying in the midst King Bors, cried out in great dismay, "Our Lady now defend us from our death and fearful wounds. Our peril groweth great, for yonder cometh one of the worshipfullest kings and best knights in all the world." "Well, who is he?" said the king of the 100 knights. "It is King Bors of Gaul," replied King Lot, "and much I marvel how he may have come with all his host into this land without our knowledge." "Well," cried King Carados, "I will encounter with this king if he will rescue me when there is need." "Ride on," they said. So King Carados and all of his host rode softly until they came within a bowshot of King Bors, and then both hosts, spurring their horses to their great swiftness, rushed at each other. King Bors encountered in the onset with a knight, and struck him through with a spear, so that he fell dead upon the earth. Then drawing his sword, he did such mighty feats of arms that all who saw him gazed with wonder. King Ban also came forth upon the field with his knights, and added yet more fury, sound, and slaughter, until at length both hosts of the 11 kings began to quake, and drawing all together into one body, they prepared to meet the worst, while a great multitude began to flee. And King Lot said, "Lords, we must take yet other means, or worse loss still awaits us. See ye not what people we have lost in waiting on the footmen, and that it cost 10 horsemen to save just one? Therefore it is my counsel to put away our footmen from us, for it is almost night, and King Arthur will not stay to slaughter them, so they can save their lives in this great wood. Then let us gather into one band all the horsemen that remain, and whosoever breaketh rank or leaves us, let him be straightway slain by him that seeth him. For it is better that we slay a coward, than through a coward we all be slain. How say ye?" Said King Lot, "Answer me, all ye kings." "It is well said," replied they all. And swearing they would never fail each other, they mended and set right their armor and their shields, and took new spears, and set them steadfastly against their thighs. They waited, and so stood still as a clump of trees stands on the plain, and no assaults could shake them. They held so hard together, which when King Arthur saw, he marveled greatly, and he was very wroth. Yet cried he, "I may not blame them, by my faith, for they do as brave men ought to do, and are the best fighting men and knights of most prowess that I ever saw or heard tell of." And so said also King Ban and Bors, and praised them greatly for their noble chivalry. But now came 40 noble knights out of King Arthur's host, and prayed that he would suffer them to break the enemy. And when they were allowed, they rode forth with their spears upon their thighs, and spurred their horses to their hottest. Then the 11 kings, with a party of their knights, rushed with set spears as fast and mightily to meet them. And when they were encountered, all the crash and splinter of their spears and armor rang with a mighty din, and so fierce and bloody was their onset that in all that day there had been no such cruel press and rage and smiting. At that same moment rode fiercely into the thickest of the struggle King Arthur and King's Ban and Bors, and slew downright on both hands, left and right, until their horses were in blood up to their fetlocks. And while the slaughter and the noise and shouting were at their greatest, suddenly there came down through the battle Merlin the wizard upon a black horse, and riding to King Arthur he cried out, "Alas, my lord, will ye have never done? Of 60,000 have ye left but 15,000 men alive? Is it not time to stay this slaying? For God is ill pleased with ye that ye have never ended by choice, and yonder king shall not be altogether overthrown this time. But if ye fall upon them any more, the fortune of this day will turn and go to them. Withdraw, Lord, therefore, and there take thy rest, for today thou hast won a great victory and overcome the noblest chivalry of all the world. And now for many years those kings shall not disturb thee. Therefore I tell thee, fear them no more, for now they are sore beaten and have nothing left but their honor. And why shouldest thou slay them and take that too?" Then said King Arthur, "Thou sayest well, and I will take thy counsel." And with that he cried out, "Ho, for the battle to cease," and sent forth heralds through the fields to stay the fighting. And gathering all the spoils, he gave it not amongst his own host, but to Kings Ban and Bors, and all of their knights and men at arms, that he might treat them with a greater courtesy as strangers. Then Merlin took his leave of Arthur and the two other kings, and went to see his master Blaise, a holy hermit, dwelling in Northumberland, who had nourished him all through his youth. And Blaise was passing glad to see him, for there was a great love ever between them. And Merlin told him how King Arthur had sped in the battle, and how it had ended, and told him the names of every king and every knight of worship who was there. So Blaise wrote down the battle, word for word, as Merlin told him, and in the same way ever after, all of the battles of King Arthur's days, Merlin asked Blaise, his master, to record. And this, my darling, ends our story time for today. As always, I hope that you have very sweet and creepy dreams. Good night.